President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President, bills brought from the House of Representatives, petitions, papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper is listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The annual audited financial statements of Invest TT Limited for the financial year ended September 30, 2018. Thank you.
Reports from committees, urgent questions.
Madam President, I crave your indulgence to stand down with 3 urgent questions. Minister Young is expected shortly, and I'm asking that it be stood down for later in the proceedings.
Honourable Senators, I will stand down this part of the order paper for later in the proceedings.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Madam President, there are 8 questions on notice. The government is responding to 6 of those questions. I'm asking for a deferral of number 183 and number 283, both of which are directed to the Minister of National Security. And Madam President, I'm also asking that number 184 be stood down until the arrival of the Minister of National Security. Thank you.
Just 1 second. Question 183 and 283 are deferred for 14 days, Minister?
Yes, Madam President.
Are deferred for 14 days. Senator Mark?
And question 184 is referred until a little later
Yes.
in the proceedings.
Yes.
So I shall go to
185?
185.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. Question 185 to the Honourable Minister of Health.
Minister of Health?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam President. Answer. Part A. A report on this matter was brought to the attention of the Minister of Health. Part B. An investigation was launched by the Office of the Chief Medical Officer on July 10th, 2018, almost a year ago. The final report consisted of reports from the private medical institution in San Fernando, as well as independent reviews from consultant radiologists and an independent medical physicist. And to Part C, there are medical physicists employed both at the public and private health institutions to ensure that radiology equipment conforms to international standards for radiation safety. All concerns about excess radiation are investigated, and if deemed necessary, refer to the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA, of which Trinidad and Tobago is a member, for any further investigation and expert recommendation and action. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Madam President, can I, through you, inquire from the Honorable Minister whether in this particular instance there was any evidence of any excess radiation in this particular matter that engaged the Ministry of Health?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, our investigations, both from including the independent evaluation, showed that there was no evidence to substantiate the claims. Thank you very much.
Can the Minister therefore advise this Honorable Senator that the claim that was splashed throughout many newspapers and voiced on many radio stations, can the Minister indicate whether the claim made by the persons involved were false, Madam President?
Minister of Health.
Madam President, it is not for me as Minister of Health to adjudicate on whether claims are false or positive or whatever. I will simply say that the independent experts, radiologists, and physicists, when we launched this investigation over a year ago, in their opinion, they found no evidence to substantiate the claims. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Next question, Senator Haynes.
Question number 285 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the commencement date for the constructions of both Lady Hills, San Fernando, and South Cape, Port of Spain, is dependent on contractor obtaining full statutory approvals prior to the commencement of construction. This is expected to occur in the year 2019. As soon as approvals are obtained, construction will commence. The project is expected to take 2 years after the start of construction to complete, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Can I ask, through you, to the distinguished Minister of Health, Minister of Housing, rather, and Urban Development, can you provide the Senate with the list of statutory approvals required for this particular project to begin? Can you outline for us the various statutory approvals required?
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Madam President, the standard statutory approvals, TMTech, WASA, SUA, designs building. Those are the statutory approvals that are required in most constructions. Those are the ones that are, and again, that's after the contract is signed, so they are in the process of being approved right now.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, can the Minister indicate what time frame can he advise this House it would take for these statutory approvals to be finalized so that construction can commence on these 235 housing units?
Minister.
Madam President, they are far advanced in the process right now, but I cannot pinpoint the exact time.
Next question, Senator Haynes.
Question number 286 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the prospective dates for the distribution of the housing units in San Fernando and Port of Spain is immediately after the project is completed. The project duration is 2 years, and the average construction cost per unit to the HDC is approximately $1.15 million TT dollars. The subsidized prices for sale or rental to members of the public have not yet been established, Madam President.
Senator Haynes.
Can the Minister state when the application process will be open for these housing units?
That question doesn't arise, Senator Haynes. Next question. Yes?
Madam President, can the minister indicate what system would be employed for the distribution of these homes to citizens of the Republic when they are constructed? There must be a mechanism or system in place. Can you share with us what mechanism or system?
Minister?
Madam President, HDC's distribution houses is based on a random selection process, based on assessment of persons who qualify for certain amount, based on the cost of the unit, and based on the requirement of the individual as to the location that they requested.
Yeah. Next question, Senator Deonarine.
Question number 290 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Treasury Division reports its balances based on the value of checks issued, while the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago reports its balances based on checks encashed. As such, the difference between the figures reported as the overdraft with the Central Bank and in the Auditor General's Report 2018 can be explained by the following. 1, the value of unpresented checks as at September 30th, 2018 was approximately $2.748 billion. The CBTT calculates the overdraft percentage based on a suite of government's cash accounts at the bank. A number of these accounts are not represented in the consolidated statements of assets and liabilities. The value of these accounts as of September 30, 2018 was approximately $434.9 million. And 3, non-cash adjustments to the Treasury's bank accounts are made as at September 30, 2018. These adjustments are accounted for by Central Bank with effect from the date of the request to transfer funds. The value of these non-cash adjustments to the Treasury's accounts as of September 30, 2018 was approximately $592.7 million. Reconciliation statements which account for the differences between the Treasury's accounts and the Central Bank's report were prepared and have all been audited by the Auditor General's Department. Thank you, Madam President.
Next question, Senator Deonarine.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 291 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you again, Madam President. Madam President, the government, in its efforts to continue its fiscal consolidation efforts and by extension address the deficit on the exchequer account, has and continues to undertake measures to improve the efficiency of its revenue collections and administration, as well as expand its collection base by creating new avenues of revenue. Efforts to curtail superfluous and inefficient expenditure while redirecting spending to capital projects that will stimulate economic activity and improve the country's economic output are also being pursued. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Deonarine.
Thank you, Madam President. Could the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance indicate what are the measures currently being undertaken to address the inefficiencies in public expenditure?
Minister.
Yes, Madam President, there are various measures being taken. Among them is a careful review of all our contracts in terms of how they are put out for tender, proper evaluation of the tender, going back to the contractors to renegotiate sums that have been put forward, and then a careful monitoring of the actual spend. And this has resulted not only in significant reductions in the project cost, but also in savings in some of those projects. That is a significant measure that the government has taken to reduce its expenditure during the last few years.
Senator Deonarine.
Thank you, Madam President. Could the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance indicate whether there has been any, in addition to reviewing of the efficiency of contract execution, awarding and execution, has there been any independent reviews of the entire public expenditure of Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
We have started that process. We had an international body come in and review the expenditures of the three major ministries, which would be social development, health, and education. We have a report which indicates to them where the inefficiencies and duplications were identified, and efforts are being made by those individual ministries to address the issues that where the shortcomings have been identified.
Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. In light of the Minister's substantive answer with respect to investment into some capital projects and capital expenditure, can the Minister please elaborate on some of those projects in which the government will be undertaking in the medium term in order to close the deficit?
Minister.
Madam President, we have previously identified some of our major projects in this place before. They include the Phoenix Park Industrial Park, they include the dry dock facility, they include the marina in Tobago, they include the airport in Tobago. These are some of the areas we have identified for attention.
Senator Hussain.
Madam President, can the Minister then indicate what is the projected year in which the deficit is expected to close in the near future?
No, Senator. No, Madam President, I cannot identify that.
Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
President. Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled the Petroleum Act, Chapter 2201, and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, be now read a second time. Madam President, before you this afternoon is the bill to amend the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act. This is aimed at putting in place amendments to those acts which are necessary to treat with the implications of the recent closure of the Petroleum refinery as they relate to, among other things, the calculation of the subsidy. Madam President, you may be aware that with the reorganization of the business of Petroleum in particular, the part of the business which dealt with the refinery, there was a need to incorporate a new company known as Fuel Trading Company Limited. This company presently operates as a trading business to import refined petroleum products for sale in the domestic market via terminaling operations. Consequent upon this new business, several amendments are required to be made to the relevant pieces of legislation. Madam President, I will now take the opportunity to deal with the bill in its entirety. Clause 1 is self-explanatory and needs no further explanation except to say that it contains a short title of the bill. Clause 2 of the bill, Madam President, deals with the amendments to the Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201. Section 31 of that act is being amended to insert the definition for trading business as it is not currently defined in the act. In addition, the amendment explains what a trading business is for the purposes of Paria's operations. In this regard, trading business means the business of supplying petroleum product by way of purchase thereof, locally or internationally, for sale and use in Trinidad and Tobago. Furthermore, it is important to note that in the event that a refinery or refineries become operational in the future, that the refining business and the trading business could in fact be carried on by the same entity. Madam Speaker, the relevant amendments can be found in clauses 2(1)(a) and (b) of the bill. The Petroleum Regulations, Chapter 6201, remains in its present form in order to keep this country's options open in respect of the number of local refineries that can operate in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, Clause 2(2)(a) amends the price of petroleum products order to insert a definition for the term ex-terminal price because it is not currently defined in the Act. As previously stated, we now have a situation where there is sale of products in the domestic market by way of terminaling operations, and as such, a price mechanism suitable to the nature of the present operations is required. Madam President, you may be aware that the ex-refinery price of the petroleum product is the price of the petroleum product as it leaves the refinery. And similarly, the ex-terminal price of a petroleum product is the price of the petroleum product as it leaves the terminal. As refinery and terminaling operations are two different types of operations, the component buildup of the ex-refinery price in the first schedule to the price of petroleum products order is different from the component buildup for the ex-terminal price. It is in this regard that there is a need for the insertion of a fifth schedule to the order. The fifth schedule provides the basis for the computation of the new ex-terminal price. Madam President, the insertion of the fifth schedule is found at Clause 2(b) of the bill. It should be noted that there is at present no intention to delete the first schedule, which deals with the ex-refinery price. This leaves the opportunity open for refinery operations to still occur in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, requires adjustments for consistency with amendments in the Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201, and to include the operations of PARIA, namely a definition for trading business. Clause 3(a) and (b) deal with the necessary amendments. Currently, under Section 8(1) of the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, there are 4 different variables in the calculation of the subsidy, one of which is the ex-refinery price. Given that the refinery is not currently in operation, this ex-refinery price variable in the calculation would not apply. Therefore, to provide for PARIA's operations, a new subsection 1(a) was inserted after subsection 1 in Section 8 to include the new ex-terminal price variable in the calculation of the subsidy. It should be noted that if the refinery or refineries become operational in the future, subsection 1 would still allow the Minister of Energy under the Act to use the ex-refinery price in the calculation of the subsidy. It is also important to note that if both the refinery and PARIA are operating simultaneously, then the subsidy can be calculated separately in accordance with subsections 1 and 1(a) under Section 8. Madam Speaker, Clause 3(c) deals with the relevant amendment. Madam President, the bill also amends Section 12 of the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, which allows for the filing of a return to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries by a person carrying on refining or marketing business. The amendment will also require a person carrying on trading business to file such a return. In addition, Madam President, the Minister of Energy will now have to consult with persons carrying on refining business, trading business, and/or marketing business on the form of return to approved by the Minister. The form will also speak to the volume and the value of petroleum products sold by a person carrying on refining business or trading business. Madam Speaker, Madam President, the changes to Section 12 of the Petroleum Production and Levy Subsidy Act can be found in Clause 3D of the bill. Madam President, it is also proposed to amend Section 13 of the Petroleum Production and Levy Subsidy Act at Clause 3E of the bill. This section provides for the keeping of proper records. The amendment will require not only a person carrying on refining or marketing business to provide such records, but also a person carrying on trading business. The relevant amendment will also allow the Minister of Energy to authorize in writing any employee of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to inspect the records of a person carrying on refining business or trading business. Madam President, you will realize that there's a common thread throughout the amendments to the legislation. As indicated previously, the amendments are aimed at expanding the operations under the legislation to provide for a person to carry on another type of business, namely trading business, and that essentially is what the bill deals with. Madam President, I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201, and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, be now read a second time. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm very disappointed, first of all, that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries is not in this honorable House. And given the fact that he's not here, this honorable Senate was not given the kind of comprehensive evaluation and analysis required for the piece of legislation that is before us. I think the minister spoke for just about 6 minutes, and she took a seat. This is a very important piece of legislation, but I can well understand what has happened, Madam President. Both the Minister of National Security and the Minister of Energy have given priority to signing an agreement with NGC and Shell, rather than come to this honorable Parliament to deal with the people's business. And Madam President, you will have to guide this Parliament on these matters. When a minister is summoned here, whether he can go elsewhere and then come here. And then we have the Minister of Energy, who is supposed to lead off on this matter. He's elsewhere without your excuse, because nobody gave any excuse for the Minister of Energy. And we were told by the acting leader of government business that we are standing on my questions because the minister is running late. Never at one point in time did the acting leader of government business share with you, Honorable President, that the Minister of National Security was elsewhere, signing some or witnessing
All right,
something.
Senator Mark.
So I just bring that to your attention.
Yes, but Senator Mark, you've made your statement. I'd ask you to move on, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm just recording our objection to this. Madam President, this matter that is before us deals with the government having allowed a horse to bolt the stable on November the 30th, when they unceremoniously shut down, closed down Petrotrin. They have now come, Madam President, almost 8 months later to deal with a matter as it relates to amending the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, which ought to have been done simultaneously with the closure of Petrotrin. But this is how this government operates, Madam President. Nevertheless, this Honorable Senate is called upon to address the amendment to the Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201, and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, 6202, in order, Madam President, to accommodate the Petrotrin, or I should say, the business model of Paria Fuel Trading Limited. And in this particular context, we are also dealing with what Petrotrin used to carry out before it was closed down on the 30th of November. Paria Fuel is replacing the marketing function of Petrotrin. So, Madam President, as you're aware, Paria buys petroleum products, such as gasoline and diesel, from the international marketplace, and in turn sells these products to National Petroleum and Unipet, who, as you know, are the wholesalers operating in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, Paria, we understand, also exports its fuels to some of the Caribbean markets. Madam President, what we are being told today in the legislation before us is that Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, their business is described as a trading business, as opposed, Madam President, to what existed under Petrotrin, which was a refining business. And therefore, this particular company is engaged in the wholesale of fuel, as I said, to both NP and Unipet. No longer at what is called the ex-refinery price, but the ex-terminal price, Madam President. And of course, that is a very huge shift in this particular model, Madam President, because it also brings about an amendment to the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, because no longer, and I want to ask Madam President as I move on, I'd like to ask the question of the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, whether, Madam President, the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, as you would know, came into existence in 1974 when OPEC imposed an embargo on many countries who were supporting Israel in that war in the Middle East, resulting in the price of petroleum products skyrocketing based on the increase in the price of crude at that time. And the then government established legislation so that consumers who were using gasoline, whether it was premium, super, diesel, or regular, would not suffer as a result of these escalating costs, as a result of the price increases in crude oil production. As you know, Madam President, during that period, Amoco and Texaco were some of the main companies in this country, multinationals, and they would have benefited enormously from that increase in the price of crude oil. So this particular legislation that we are amending, Madam President, saw the imposition of a levy on those energy companies. And this levy, Madam President, was paid by these producing companies. The levy, Madam President, was used to offset what is called the subsidy. The subsidy that customers and consumers were called upon. They were called and they were able to benefit from lower prices as a result of this subsidy that was applied to higher prices of petroleum products. Madam President, the question that we have to ask the government, and because the minister was so short in her contribution, we did not get this answer. So I will pose the question to the minister, so when she's winding up, Madam President, she can share with us and the general population the state of play. Madam President, the question is, when that subsidy element in the price was introduced at the time, it was, oil companies were funding that levy. But now, Madam President, we have a situation where the government has actually closed down temporarily, I understand, the refinery. The question is, we are now importing petroleum products from different parts of the Gulf Coast of the United States. I would like to ask, Madam President, through you, whether the subsidy paid via levy by these energy companies, whether that levy is still being paid and applied through a subsidy which would result in lower prices at the pump for customers who have to buy super gasoline, premium gasoline, regular gasoline, or diesel fuel. We would like the Honorable Minister to share with us, because, Madam President, you will see in this piece of legislation, which I thought because of its technical nature, there are appendices there that is given us as a parliament an appreciation, Madam President, of what is called the formula for determining not only wholesale prices for petroleum products, but it is also identifying the kind of prices that we have to pay at the retail level and the formula that has to be employed in order to apply this new arrangement involving Paria Fuel Trading Company. So I think it is incumbent upon the minister to share with this honorable House, Senate, what is the state of play, Madam President, as it relates to this matter. Can the minister indicate, Madam President, whether the energy companies, BP, Shell, BHP, EOG, all of them who are engaged in the production of crude oil and the exportation of crude oil, and they have to pay a production levy, whether that production levy is still being paid. And if it is being paid, Madam President, how does that subsidy arising out of the levy computed in the formula that we have in this bill, Madam President? Because the minister did not give us any hint whatsoever of the role of the production subsidy and levy and how customers and consumers, Madam President, are going to benefit from this whole arrangement. Because we know, Madam President, we are moving from what is called ex-refinery price to what is called ex-terminal price. So we have, as I said, this company called ParlView importing fuel from the Gulf Coast of the United States, bringing it into Trinidad, paying shipping costs, paying freight costs. When it arrives here, Madam President, customs duties. When it arrives here, we have to pay fees to store and to perform a number of processes. And then a final price is determined given the formula that we have been provided with in this piece of legislation. So I think it's important for the minister to share with us, Madam President, what is the arrangement for us at this time. And I would like the Honourable Minister to indicate that. Madam President, as I go into what is called the definition, Madam President, if we go to the definition, and I'm referring to clause 2, Madam President, C, Roman 2, and it talks about what is called trading business. And Madam President, if you look and you study carefully, the definition, which is now being introduced for the first time in our legislation, which is the Petroleum Act, and then it is also being introduced in the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act. It tells us, Madam President, that trading business means the business of supplying petroleum products by way of purchase, of the purchase thereof, locally or internationally for resale and use in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Madam President, this is not a very simple matter, as the minister attempted to make it out to be. Madam President, I have in my possession the Petroleum Act. It is 6201. And Madam President, in this act, which we are amending, it speaks, Madam President, to what is called the definition of a petroleum product. And Madam President, always bear in mind that Paria Fuel Trading Company is engaged in marketing. Marketing. That is their function. The question that has to be asked, Madam President, when we look at the petroleum product definition, and it says any finished or partly finished product derived from petroleum by any refining process. So we are not processing. That is coming from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. But the concept of a petroleum product remains because it finds its way in the trading definition, in the definition rather of trading business when they talk about supplying petroleum products. So we have to see the link between the definition in the legislation and what this particular attempt by the government is seeking to achieve. But Madam President, what is even more interesting, remember, Madam President, Paria Fuel Trading Company is a marketing organization. It's a marketing company. Madam President, in the definition under the Petroleum Act of what is called petroleum operations, I want to share with this honorable House what petroleum operations mean. It means the operations related to the various phases of the petroleum industry. And Madam President, it includes natural gas processing, exploration, producing, refining, and Madam President, transporting and marketing petroleum or petroleum products. This is what the definition means, among other things which I wouldn't burden you with. If you go to this definition, Madam President, you will see what petroleum operations mean. Madam President, what is even more important for us to pay attention to is provision or section 6, 1 and 2 of this act. It deals with petroleum operations. And Madam President, remember, petroleum operations include the marketing and transportation of petroleum products. The trading business is engaged in the supplying of petroleum products. Therefore, it falls squarely under the definition of petroleum operations because it is involved in marketing, it is involved in transportation. Madam President, Section 6.1 of this Petroleum Act says, and I quote, "Subject to this Act, no person shall engage in petroleum operations on land or in a submarine area unless he first obtains a license as provided for in this Act or the regulations." It goes on in subsection 2 and says, Madam President, a person who contravenes this section is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500,000 and in the case of a continuing offense to a further fine of $50,000 for every day during which the offense continues. Madam President, I raised this and I read this for your consumption because the government has to tell this Parliament my information, and Madam President, I may be wrong. I'm always subject to correction. My information is Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited is operating in Trinidad and Tobago without a license. I want to repeat. Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited is operating in Trinidad and Tobago from my information and investigation without an approved license by the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. Madam President, if that is so, this legislation that we have before us today, this legislation, and the Minister of the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Allyson West, Senator, the Honorable Allyson West, I will take my seat for a few seconds with your leave to ask the Honorable Minister to clear for the President of the Senate and for this Senate, Madam President, whether Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited has a license that has been approved by the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry. I will give her 2 seconds, Madam President, and I will rise again. I want to know what is the truth. Madam President, 2 seconds is up. 2 seconds are up. So, Madam President, I can only assume that my information is correct. My information is correct. that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has a company operating in contravention of the law, in breach of the law, in violation of the law, Madam President. And Madam President, if I can tell you, this is not a tale out of school. Both Garakara refinery is operating without a license. That is also operating without a license. And the third one, Madam President, is the so-called heritage.
Senator Mark, you're taking you've made us some points, but you need to move on and get back to the matter at hand. Okay? You need to, yes, tie in what you're saying to the matter at hand.
Yeah,
please.
Madam President, no, I was just was a few seconds, I strayed. So let's go back to, we're going back. Yeah, we can go back to Point-a-Pierre, because we are in Point-a-Pierre. I fought Point-a-Pierre, and my honorable friend fought Point-a-Pierre with me. I guess I'm licks, I must admit. I get licks. And I admit that. But I'll live to fight another day. I'll live to fight for another day. I get licks. So, Madam President, let us go to Point-a-Pierre because we are familiar with that territory. We are familiar with the territory of Point-a-Pierre. Madam President, the government of this country has to tell us, and Madam President is a very serious one, because when the minister made a statement, her opening statement or remark, she made it very clear, very brief as it may have been. She indicated that Paria emerged out of the ashes. She didn't say ashes, but I am saying that. But arose out of the closure of Petroleum. Madam President, would you believe that the financial year for Petroleum, last financial year, was 2018? And Madam President, the audited financial accounts of Petroleum for fiscal 2018, which was supposed to be published at the end of September 30th, 2018. We are now in June, Madam President, of 2019.
Senator Mark, please, I have to now try and steer you to the matter at hand. And please, I really need you to come back to the bill that is before us, okay?
Madam President, I know this is a very technical bill, and because the minister didn't do justice, I have to do justice to the bill. The minister spoke for 6 minutes.
Mark,
yes,
I am asking you to do justice to the standing orders.
Yes.
And I would ask you, please, to come back to the bill, okay?
So, Madam President, let me go back to the Petroleum Act, because I think this is very relevant. Madam President, so here it is. We have a situation. And Madam President, just to consolidate the point I made earlier, when I sought to indicate to this honorable House that a company that is operating either on land or sea must have a license, whether you're involved in exploration, production, or you're involved in marketing or transportation. And Madam President, to consolidate the point that I made earlier, and based on your wise counsel, I invite you to travel with me, to journey with me under the petroleum regulations on page 35, Madam President. And on page 35, regulation 3, sub 1, states, and I quote, subject to sub-regulation 2, the licenses may be issued to persons to engage in petroleum operations shall be, Madam President, an exploration license, an exploration, production, public petroleum rights license, a refining license, Madam President, transportation license. Madam President, it goes on to say, H, a marketing license in respect of any of the following operations: wholesale, peddling, retail transaction, bunkering, including the supply of petroleum products to a marketing licensee, owned ship, or aircraft. Madam President, look, we have it here clearly under Regulation 3, Madam President, where you must obtain a license, Madam President, to operate. And it is clear, Madam President, from what we have seen from the literature that none exists in the instance of this question, this company. So, Madam President, we are asking the government to address this issue as a matter of urgency. Now, Madam President, you would know that under the Petroleum Act of Trinidad and Tobago, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, through the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry, is in fact compelled under the law and under the regulations to establish what is called a petroleum register. Madam President, if a petroleum register was established, we could have gone on the website of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries to determine, Madam President, if a license was issued to this particular company and to other companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago. But, Madam President, no such petroleum register is established at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. So you and I are unable to determine, Madam President, whether this company has been given, has been granted, a license has been approved for it to operate. Madam President, I want to also indicate to you that you would recall some time ago, there was a big commotion, a lot of discussion surrounding Paria Fuel Trading Company. Whether it was to be sold, Madam President, whether it was not to be sold, or whether, Madam President, if a good buyer comes along, they will sell Paria Fuel. Madam President, the government needs to come clean with us today in this Parliament. How this particular legislation is structured, Madam President, it is structured in such a way that it gives and it makes room, Madam President, for the possibility of a new operator coming on the scene and maybe, Madam President, purchasing not only Paria, but most importantly, the refinery. So here, the definition, Madam President, that we have here. It talks about not only local, Madam President, that you will be supplying petroleum products locally for resale, but, Madam President, you are going to be supplying petroleum products internationally for resale and use, Madam President. So what is happening, Madam President, is that in this simple definition, it is loaded with a lot of possibilities that the minister has not been able to clear up. The Honorable Minister, Madam President, did not tell this Parliament, as far as I'm aware, that the government is considering, by the end of December of 2019, selling the refinery to another independent operator. And the possibility exists, Madam President, that when that refinery is sold to another individual or operator, it may be that the marketing arm of this business, which is known as Paria Fuel Trading Company, can also be included in this entire exercise. So we'll have the refinery being owned, Madam President, and control, and would be in control, rather, of the marketing arm of the operations at Point of Pierre, which is now manifested in this company known as Paria Fuel. So, Madam President, when you look at the definition, it tells you it is not simply, Madam President, that you're going to just get pariah fuel consistent with the formula that we have here to sell products to the citizens of this country. It is not that alone. It is pariah being taken over by a new company in the coming period, and both of them would be one operating in Trinidad and Tobago. And I believe the government, Madam President, owes this country a proper explanation. Is this legislation, Madam President, designed to facilitate this sale, ultimately, of pariah to a new owner that will come on board, Madam President, very shortly? And by December, we are told, somewhere I read, that sometime in December, we will have a new operator on the block. And that operator may be able to buy this company called Pariah Fuel Trading. So it is very important that we pay attention to this issue as well. So, Madam President, when we talk in subsection 2 of clause 2 about the price of petroleum products, you will see, Madam President, when we talk about the price of petroleum products, we are talking about an order in which the main amendment that is being inserted under this price of petroleum products order, it is being amended to introduce the following definition. And what is the following definition, Madam President? Ex-terminal price. And what does ex-terminal price mean?
Senator Mark, you have 5 more minutes.
Yeah. Madam President, what ex-terminal price means? It simply means the price at which petroleum products may be disposed of or are to be deemed to have been disposed of by the trading business of any person to the marketing business of such person or any other person, disposal and use in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, this to my mind tells you the real intention of the government, even though they didn't say it publicly and openly in this debate. The government is about to sell out the refinery at Point-a-Pier to someone, and that will be manifested come December, and that person or that international company will now be given the power to buy pariah fuel, Madam President, and it will be an integrated operation. The only difference is that colonialism, imperialism, would be revisiting Trinidad and Tobago with a bang under the PNM. That is what it will mean, Madam President. Instead of Trinidad and Tobago owning, as we had owned, the refinery at Point-a-Pier, and we were in charge of our refinery, we gone back to Massa Day. Massa Day come back.
Please, in your last few minutes, in your wrapping up, please deal with the bill, okay?
Madam President, I do not know if you studied it, but I studied it. And I believe, with your leave. No, I know this bill is a serious bill, you know. This is a very serious bill. And I am telling you, Honorable President, that the Honorable mover of this bill did not do justice in this Parliament. And because she didn't do justice, I understand, you know, I was there before, so I know what you are facing. But we have to understand, Madam President, that this is a very serious matter that we are dealing with. And there are dots that we have to connect. And this is what I am trying to do in my contribution. I'm looking at the Petroleum Act. I'm looking at the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act to show, Madam President, the connection between what they have in this bill and the intentions of the government. Because it has consequences for the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's our duty to expose it and to let them know what's going on, Madam President. But I bow to your ruling. Madam President, I didn't talk about Petrotrin. I didn't talk about the closure of Petrotrin. It came from the lips and utterances of the statement of the Speaker who opened this debate. Madam President, I want to ask that the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance, in the few minutes I have, or 2 minutes I have remaining, can the Minister bring to the attention of this Parliament what is the state with the closure of Petrotrin, Madam President, with the fake oil scandal? $100 million.
Point of order.
What is the state?
Point of order. 46-1.
Senator Mark,
I am winding down.
yes, you now have some seconds, please.
Yes, so Madam President, this is a very serious matter. We want to propose some amendments to the legislation because we want trading business to include, Madam President, marketing. And we want Paria fuel in that context to be incorporated on the trading business. So we serve notice on the government that we will be proposing amendments at the committee stage for this particular bill to have some teeth and some effect. Madam President, I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Senator Deonarine.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to contribute to the debate today. My contribution will be somewhat brief and would primarily seek clarification on various aspects of the bill. So the bill before us today seems to be a fairly simple one. It is basically a legislative adjustment required to facilitate the move of refining crude oil to importing the refined product, which is done through the operations of Paria fuel trading. In these three clauses of the bill, I see that adjustments are being made to include definitions and suitable language to encapsulate trading business, the ex-terminal price, and subsequently the inclusion of a new formula to calculate the fuel subsidy. Today, Madam President, I want to comment on three aspects of the bill, and these are, one, focusing on managing the cost structure of the ex-terminal price, the calculation of the subsidy, what are we expecting it to be now, given that we have an ex-terminal price which should reflect greater efficiency. And the third thing is the need to continue on a part of subsidy reform. So, Madam President, we now have an ex-terminal price. Before we had an ex-refinery price, which was very high due to the inefficiencies associated with refining crude oil locally, that is through the Petrotrin refinery. Going forward, we have to be cautious in monitoring the operations of Paria fuel trading to ensure that the ex-terminal price is managed and we do not allow inefficiencies to seep through and unnecessarily send up this ex-terminal price. This will subsequently translate to a higher fuel subsidy. From my research, I understand that the structure of the ex-terminal price is made up of the world market price, which is the market price or the US Gulf Coast price, plus the cost of freight from the refinery to Trinidad and Tobago, plus the customs duty, plus terminaling fees, that is the fees associated with storage, handling, and associated overhead costs that will be accumulated by Paria fuel trading, and plus the distribution cost, that is the cost associated with delivery of the gas from Paria fuel trading to NP, Unipet, and all the other stations. In terms of the world market price, the cost of freight and the customs duty, we have little control over. However, in terms of the terminal fee, we need to exercise extreme oversight over these costs incurred. We need to ensure that payments are made to suppliers on time to reduce costs associated with delays. Because any delay would mean that given the foreign exchange shortages, we would need to ensure that we secure advances for foreign exchange to pay for these shipments. So my first question is, what is the current arrangements in place to ensure that a steady supply of US dollars is available to cover the cost to suppliers for these shipments? With respect to the associated overhead costs, what resources are available for oversight, monitoring, and evaluation? Whilst these are important, it is also critical to ensure that standard operating procedures and processes are established and also documented. Furthermore, Madam President, when I talk about monitoring and evaluation, I do not speak about only ensuring that there is an internal audit and an external audit. I also mean that there needs to be frequent monitoring and oversight through regular risk assessment and risk mitigation strategies. With that being said, I am wondering how much lower do we expect the ex-terminal price to be compared to the ex-refinery price? Because a lower ex-terminal price will contribute positively towards the subsidy. The amount of subsidy that the government would have to pay would be significantly lower. The ex-refinery price averaged in 2018 at around $2.11 for premium, $2.08 for super unleaded, $2.04 for super regular, $2.08 for diesel, and $2.15 for kerosene. And those were the ex-refinery prices. How much lower do we expect these prices to be for 2019? With an ex-terminal price lower than the previous ex-refinery price, what is the estimated impact on the subsidy? Compared to 2018, where the annual total subsidy claim was TT 1.042 billion, what is the forecast for 2019? Because given this move, we should expect a lower subsidy. However, looking at the subsidy claims over 2015 to 2018 from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industry, the total claims were 2015, $1.7 billion, 2016, $589 million, 2017, $805 million, and 2018, $1.04 million. Although there was a dramatic decline in 2016, the subsidy claim have been increasing since. So finally, Madam President, the last thing I would like to ask is that in light of not taking further action to reduce the fuel subsidy, are we at least trying to strategically target these subsidies to prevent any sort of allocative inefficiencies in the market that are presently apparent? With those few words, Madam President, I hope to get clarification on my questions, and I thank you.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. And I want to say that I am going to be as short as the mover of the bill, and it's because of the simplicity of the matter before us. It's a quite short and simple bill containing all of 3 clauses, and we all understand what it is to do, which is to make provision to add trading business to both pieces of legislation to account for the operations of ParlView trading. And it is a fact that with the cessation of refining operations by Petroleum and the introduction of the importation of fuels to supply the domestic market by ParlView Fuel Trading Company, the computation of an ex-terminal price is required in lieu of the ex-refinery price. And I think considerable research would have been done in looking at the options available for the pricing of petroleum products in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore the government came up with this particular computation of this new ex-terminal price. And Senator Deonarine, you are right. You said you did your research as to what this new to external price is comprised of. And you are so right, it's the related prices for each of the corresponding products in the 5th schedule. Also, the rate of freight and paid for the carriage or the transportation of the petroleum products, whether by air, land, or sea. Also, the rate of import duty enforced at the date of the import of such petroleum products, and also the terminaling fee, which is the one that you had concerns of in terms of efficiencies. The terminaling fee, which encompasses all the costs incurred due to terminaling, storage, and all of those ancillary services at that terminal. So we're talking about the financing, the margins, the operations costs, the insurance, the storage losses, maintenance, capital expenditure, credit, and all of those gamut of things. And I can tell you with certainty that we have employed at Paria Fuel Trading employees that are well equipped, and the proof is in the pudding in the way that the Paria Fuel has been managed since coming into operations, and I will speak to that shortly. So those are the kinds of margins that, of elements that were taken into the ex-terminal price, and your research was quite right. So again, as I said, Paria was created to ensure this uninterrupted supply of fuel to the local market. It was consequential, and thus far, Paria has been able to do what it was set about to do, which is to secure this supply of fuel to the country. I want to say that it has been quite a success. There has been a seamless transition for the supply. I said this in this house before. It all came out of the reinvention of Petroleum, and the 5 companies became one of them. The transition was a key success, was successful. There was a safe shutdown of the refinery, and of course the export of local crude began, and the importation of refined products. Paria is living up to its value proposition. Its business model focuses on the safe, the responsible, and the efficient terminal operations in order to deliver crude oil and condensate and other petroleum products, and it is doing just that. Its mandate will include the crude handling and loading, the product trading and marketing, the delivery and distribution, and leasing opportunities or bunkering opportunities if any of those should come up. So it has all been going to plan, and it has been run extremely successfully. And of course, all of the products that they have said that they would supply have been supplied on the in the marketplace to the Trinidad and Tobago public. And of course, there has never been any fuss or any outrage or anything like that. It really has just been a smooth transaction. Paria would have utilized several of the storage and delivery facilities that Petroleum once owned, and so that they, in terms of all of the requirements with vessels and the necessary berths and so on, all of that is in use. So it certainly has all of the necessary storage capacity and so on that is required. There's been absolutely no hitches to this, to Paria's activity. And there's been, as I said before, there's been security of supply and so on. I know that Senator Mark would have raised this whole question of a commotion about selling Paria fuel. There's nothing like that contemplated, Senator Mark. And this is just your usual hysteria. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that contemplated. We all know that there have been several bids for the refinery, and naturally when that comes along, we will have to examine what is done about Paria, because without a doubt, there will now be product that is available on the local market in TT dollars. I know there was concern again raised by Senator Deonarine about the foreign exchange availability, and I couldn't give you the details, but I know that the Ministry of Finance took the necessary action to ensure that there would be no hindrance with regard to the availability of foreign exchange. But notwithstanding, we know that this is something that we would want to avoid, and therefore, if product is available in the TT on the TT market at the, in TT dollars, quite naturally, that's the option that will be looked at. But the exact business model has not been worked out. You have to see what the bids are and what in the final analysis, what the company would be offering, or I don't know the extent of the services. We can't. This is not something that we could guess or pontificate on. So that commotion, no, there'll be nothing of the sort, and the very seamless transition we've had with Petroleum and removing the state from the enormous losses which the taxpayer carried for so many years, $2 billion in the last 3 years before the decision was taken. We will be taking the right decision, and it's so that we look forward to the opportunity that presents itself when the bidding process is completed. So as I said before, it's simple and it's short. The minister would have gone through all of the clauses. There is no need for that. I've explained what the formula is, and I've given certainty in terms of the efficiencies, which the work of the employees of the Paria Fuel Trading Company, the efficiencies of in the way they will carry out their responsibilities. I can say that I could see that there's no inflation to the customer also, no inflation of price also to the customer, that this is being done in a very fair way and fair and efficient way. This is the new reality. This is what we have had to face in the decision which we took, and therefore the adjustment in the 2 pieces of legislation was necessary, because at the time when those pieces of legislation were put in place, none of this was contemplated about importing and terminaling and that kind of thing. This is not Trinidad and Tobago is not the only one in this situation. There are many other countries that have had to restructure their energy business and have had to go into the fuel trading business. This and that has been done. But what we have done is that we have saved the public from the losses which were previously incurred. We've put a system in place to ensure that there is a seamless availability of product to the population, and there's also the opportunity for Paria to trade outside of Trinidad and Tobago to the CARICOM markets, and I couldn't tell you the extent of which that has been done. But the operations to date, I give you the assurance that it has been successful. And again, I would like to take the opportunity to commend the staff of Paria Trading, the board, the management, again, for making the transition seamless. I mean, I know there would have been some noise and old talk and negativity, but all of that is now out of the way, because there's been no question in terms of the ability to supply products to the public. So again, I'm sure I give Senator Deonarine again the assurance that Paria at this time is deepening its trading relations. I'm sure that they are examining on the global market where the best price is for the products, to ensure that at the end of the day we give a price that is reasonable, and again, as I said, they operate with efficiency. I have the sense that the group of people there operate in international with an international flair. As I said, this is international business, and I give this every certainty that they operate in a way that we had expected. Again, I spoke about the future of the refinery. We can't just guess or pull out of a hat what the final bid would be, but at the end of the day, we will know, the government will do what is in the best interest for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and ensure that whatever operations would, as I said, redound to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So just finally, I mean, Paria was created for a particular reason, uninterrupted supply, and that has happened in a very seamless fashion. And and what we've come here to do today, to the change from the ex-refinery to the ex-terminal price, is one that has been approved by our cabinet. And as I said before, they've examined all the options and they've come up with the right model, which I have detailed, and to ensure that all of these products are available to the public at a reasonable price and so on. And we're just fixing the necessary 2 pieces of legislation. Thank you.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to join in this debate as we, on the miscellaneous provisions, petroleum, production, levy, and subsidy. Madam President, I can't help but notice the government's undue haste in going through the provisions of this bill. I tried as best as I could to take notes on what the Minister of Trade was attempting to tell the nation here today. I'll tell you what I have written down here. It's all going according to plan, the Minister said on several occasions, never articulating what that plan is, so we still have no clue what is going according to plan. The Minister just said to assure us that whatever it is all going according to plan. And that the transaction was smooth. There were no hiccups whatsoever. Everything went, again, according to this mythical plan that they have going on. Now, Madam President, I'll get through some of my points here, but I really wanted to start on this concept that the Minister had, that everything was smooth and the transaction was smooth, and that what we're doing here today is just putting a couple of things in place from the, as they call it, the restructuring of the operations of Petroleum, which we know, in fact, to be the closure of Petroleum, which put well over 5,000 persons out of a job. And if that is the idea of a smooth transaction, Madam President, really and truly, I don't want to see what rocky waters is under this PNM administration. Okay. Said there was absolutely no, I think, Madam President, in directing what the Minister no doubt thought to be a rebuttal of Senator Mark and the consideration of whether or not Paria will be sold. The Minister referred to it as hysteria. I don't know where the Minister of Trade was in March of 2019, Madam President, when the government had to, Minister Khan, who is notably absent at the moment.
Yes, I wish to, Senator Haynes, I wish to draw your attention to the fact Senator Mark has already alluded to certain issues with the Minister not being here. And I would ask that that not be repeated in all the contributions to come, okay?
I assure you, Madam President, that as soon as the Minister arrives, people will stop. Yes. But, Madam President, the Minister of Energy had to go on record, and I'll read the title of this article here. This is from Luke TT on March 18, 2019. Government orders retraction of RFPs for Paria Fuel Trading Company. The government has retracted all requests for proposals for the sale of Paria Trading Company. The Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, Franklin Khan, said in a statement issued on March 18, 2019, that an order was issued to retract any request for proposals for the Paria Trading Company. Now, Madam President, in order to retract something, it means it must have been done. That the request for proposals for the sale of Paria Trading Company had to be a thing that was done in order for the minister to retract it. So when you come here and you want to talk about hysteria and where Senator Mark is getting his information from, it's from you all. You had to retract the sale, the request for proposals. And therefore, when you come here now to tell us, look, there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to look over here, all of these amendments are simple and everything we're doing here is very simple, Madam President, we cannot believe that because they are still pretending at this point that there was no attempt to sell Paria in March of 2019. It is now June and you're telling us it's hysteria. Amazing, Madam President. I want to get the bill that we have in front of us here today, Madam President, is seeking to accommodate the business model of the Paria Fuel Trading Company. And as innocuous as that sounds, and as they will try to make it, as the government bench will try to make it, as each member contributes for 5 minutes, again, in an effort to convince us of the simplicity, begs one question, Madam President. We are in June of 2019, and we are now seeking to accommodate the business model of Paria Fuel Trading Limited. Madam President, in August of 2018, and I have to go through this timeline, and I'm going to be very deliberate with the timeline that I'm going through, Madam President, because what got us here today is critical. And it also shows that what the government attempts to paint as hysteria is, in fact, exactly what is happening. And what we are doing is stating the facts as they have occurred in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President. So if we are in June, at the end of June, now seeking to accommodate the business model of Paria Fuel Trading Company, when in August, the announcement to shut down Petroleum and put untold numbers of persons out of work. And we said then that you're doing this in an ad hoc and vice manner, and that there was no rollout strategy and no plan, Madam President. It appears now, today, that we were extraordinarily accurate in that assertion, Madam President. Because if it took you from November, well, the actual shutdown of Petroleum took place on November 30th. If it took you from then till now to know that you have to do these things, what else, what other parts of the puzzle are you missing? What else can we be coming here and asked to do because the government missed certain important pieces of information or important changes because of their haste, Madam President? You see, Albert Einstein famously said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, you know, I don't think that when you look at what this government's energy policy has been and their bizarre behavior with what is our most important industry, Madam President, I don't even think Einstein could explain what is going on here. You see, the government has, over the last year, probably a little more than that, they have, on the one hand, tried to make energy their defining achievement, having, you know, energy, spotlight on energy and all of these massive, probably expensive workshops, etc. Going here, there, and everywhere. The ministers of energy, as you will, and at the same time being very opaque in or lacking in accountability in terms of the information that is given to the public, Madam President, on important matters such as energy. And the Minister of Energy is on record as saying that accountability has to be measured. You can't go into all of the details. And when you look at the debate today, Madam President, when you look at what is happening here today, it is a continuation of that approach to our energy matters. So you have a bill. The bill seeks to accommodate the operations of Paria, and no one thus far can tell us, well, what Paria was doing in the interim since November 30th. Nobody was telling us what has been occurring if we're now bringing this legislation to accommodate the business model. And you see, Madam President, if the approach had been one of our openness and transparency in the energy sector from the beginning, if the government had been upfront and accountable and had given us the details that we asked for last year, we wouldn't be here today. Because any responsible government, Madam President, any responsible governing agency, as of August last year, when you made the announcement that you were closing our flagship energy company, one of the most critical companies in Trinidad and Tobago, when you made that announcement, what you would have done then, Madam President, in my estimation, would have been to say, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to roll out. So we're going to form these companies. You're going to do this legislation. Theoretically, could have been brought since November last year if they knew what they were doing. But Madam President, here you have it, 6 months odd later, and the government is still coming here and trying to tell us and convince us that all is well and there's nothing to look at over here. But Madam President, as I went through the legislation, I noted that all of the amendments that we were making in Section 2, in Clause 2, what we were looking at, it was making it broad. Because as the Minister of Trade said, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, so we have to make it as wide as possible. And you see that, and I think the fact that they cannot understand that that is what our issue is, that when you are playing fast and loose with energy in Trinidad and Tobago, it must be a cause for concern for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, that you can come here and tell us, look, we're doing this, trust us, all will work out, but you cannot acknowledge that the decisions that you've taken have had massive ramifications for the majority of Trinidad and Tobago. That you could come here and say that Senator Mark is hysterical and that everything went smoothly when so many people remain unemployed, Madam President. I find that...
Senator Haynes, you've now been speaking for quite some time, and you've made your points, but you need to make some comments on the bill itself, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I sought to contextualize...
No need to give me an explanation. It's fine. You just move on. Yes.
No problem, Madam President. When we are, I think, as we are discussing ParlView, fuel trading company, I had a couple questions. The Minister of Trade, and then as I looked at the contributions in the other place, because that's kind of where, as it stands today, we would have to get the bulk of our information, since the Senate the government bench and the Senate seems remarkably unprepared to debate today. We had a couple questions in terms of ParlView, and the Minister of Finance sought to tell us that ParlView is efficient and that it's doing well and nothing to worry about. But one of the questions that we had to ask was, if ParlView is inefficient, will the taxpayers be asked to subsidize this inefficiency? And will the inefficiency be built into the ex-terminal price? And you see, the questions we have to ask, Madam President, are because, as I have said before, the lack of accountability, because we have not seen any statements or audited or unaudited from any of these companies, and the data has been missing. What we have are assertions from our government that I have already said we have difficulty believing, but they are seeking to tell us that we just need to believe what they have to say. Madam President, I also looked at, when the government is talking about, the Minister of Trade raised it here today, the discussion on hiring the best in class for ParlView, and that they've put everything on track. And Madam President, we've known from previous debates that I have been in contact with a number of persons who had been part of the Petroleum saga and who have lost their jobs. And And before I stood up here today, I got a text message because they wanted to ask the minister, well, who exactly has been hired in Petroleum? How many person, in Paria, sorry. How many person? Yeah.
Point of order, 46-1.
Well, I'm responding to you directly. I found it interesting.
May I make a ruling,
Yes.
please? May I be allowed to? Thank you very much. Senator Haynes, please continue, but bear in mind what I've already cautioned you on, okay?
Thank you, Madam President. Sorry that I preempted your ruling because it really was a direct response to the Minister of Trade. So again, you see with haste, yes, that's what happens with haste. You tend to forget what happened. And Madam President, when as I was saying, when you look at the dream that was sold to us was that by breaking up Petroleum into these smaller companies, they would be more efficient. And we were told repeatedly about this unsustainable wage bill at Petroleum.
To me, you are re-debating an issue that has already been ventilated in other debates. There's a specific aim of this bill. And I get that you want to make some of the points, but you need to not reintroduce debates of the past. You need to be able to focus on this bill and make the points accordingly, okay?
Yes, Madam President. I think you'd appreciate that some of these points have to necessarily must come back in here because as the...
I appreciate I understand that you need to tie in your points, you may want to, but you need to do it faster and more tightly, okay?
Madam, I'll try to go quickly, right, Madam President? So that what we're looking at, sorry, I lost my space there for a second, where we're talking about the operations of Paria, because if I get it correctly, we are talking about the operations of Paria. This bill is, by and large, to facilitate the operations of the Paria Trading Company. In discussing that, the minister raised the point that persons had been hired, etc., right, and that everything was moving efficiently and smoothly. So my point was, one, how many persons have been hired? Because we've so far been only told about the CEO. And there had been a lot of debate, a lot of discussion about the CEO's salary. But if the minister is coming here again and telling us, look, everything is running smoothly and business is going well, how is it that we haven't seen the material impact of any of these things, Madam President? And in the crux of my preparation here today to come to this Parliament as we debated this bill was that when you look at how the events have unfolded over time, it is clear that the government is still rolling this thing out and then just trying to hit swings and misses because there's no comprehensive and has been no comprehensive policy articulated, no rollout plan, and no measures for which Trinidad and Tobago must judge the success or failure, yes, of any of these companies, Madam President. And so even when you bring this legislation and you talk about its simplicity and you talk about what it's trying to do, and it's really, and you try to couch it as best as you can, the fact remains, Madam President, when you come here today, what you're doing is putting an indictment on the incompetence of this government. And the fact is, in August of 2018, they had no clue what was going to happen over the course of this year, and we are still seeing it rolling out today as part of this legislation and whatever else they may come up with between now and the end of the year. And I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Deyalsingh.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to partake in this bill, an act to amend the Petroleum Act and the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act. This bill I appreciate this bill is necessary to treat with the implications of the closure of the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago Refinery, in particular also the calculation of the subsidy on fuel. And with the recognition that Petroleum, as part of the business which dealt with refinery, in need arose to incorporate a new company known as the Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited. This company presently operates as a trading business to import refined petroleum products for the sale in the domestic and other markets. So I see this has now created the need for an amendment to move from a model where we're looking at strictly as a refinery company to a company that deals with trading. So in a sense, we are now looking at this new company which imports fuel, takes it, and now distributes it. So in a sense, we are just like a middleman having the business of getting the material in and distributing it to others locally and regionally. What I must say, Madam President, I have to echo the fears of Senator Mark when he mentioned the fact that, when this subsidy and the levy first came into place, it was really to protect the individuals. It was to protect the citizens from markets which had fluctuations, the OPEC, 1 minute you'll have prices going skyrocketing. So it was there to put that protection in place. And I'm hoping somehow we can have a sense of also protecting our citizens. And I'm hoping certain mechanisms could be put in place to further protect our citizens in case there are any fluctuation in prices, because there are a lot of citizens complaining of the hard times they serve, of the prices of goods and services. And I'm thinking any sort of interference with the Levy and Subsidy Act, I'm hoping the Minister of Finance could give me some sort of a guarantee or some sort of a comfort that, things wouldn't skyrocket to put a further burden on our citizens. Again, I also fear too that, I've been hearing that the company is doing well. It's getting a profit. So we are getting a profit by getting the goods in and selling over. But we have to be cautious to the fact that other players could come into this market, Madam President. And another player, a country with bigger finances, could suddenly come and look at our country and say, let's teach them a lesson in case any sort of international problems are occurring. Another company could say, let's stifle the economy. Let's flood the market with a cheaper goods and service, or for the regional persons products that are cheaper. And in that way, the same company that is making the profit now will be stifled. So we have to be careful the international forces do not come in. And what we are now saying, it's a company that is making profit would suddenly be in a position where that company may be in a position where they are competing with big markets outside. So this bill was described by persons on the other side as a small bill. But, Madam President, this bill it's really not such a small bill, because it's $1 billion operation. And before I go into the clauses, I will just want to elaborate the fact that this bill, I think it's a bill that we have to look at it in the sense that what it can do to the taxpayers. There is the bond that was borrowed before, where I think it's 850 US million, which is more than 5 billion TT, which is due, I think I think sometime in August. Sorry.
Senator Deyalsingh, I allow senators an opportunity to put your presentation in the context, but it has to be in the context of the bill. And I would ask members, as the debate continues, to please bear that in mind. So you're now kind of veering off of the bill itself, okay?
Thank you, Madam President. I was just trying to elaborate. It's not a small bill, Madam. It's a sense that I think that, it brings up the point that whatever we are doing here, whatever we are giving the companies, the 4 companies now, our blessings, and I think the government had no choice. They were in a state where they had no choice to look at what was happening in the company. And just as how a few years ago, currently assets were sold out, and it caused a lot of distress within the community. Similarly, hard decisions had to be made and was made. So I'm looking at the context of this bond issue, 850 million bond issue several years ago for the upgrade of point-of-pay. And I'm thinking it brings up the point that if we got all that money years ago, what happened to this upgrade? Wasn't the company upgraded? the players that actually were responsible in the board, were they doing their jobs? So I look at the, again, Madam, I looked at the fact that the monies that would be owed, I think it's a lot. And I'm thinking that even 10 to 12 years ago when we borrowed that money, lenders actually give us this money without any government guarantee. And I found that strange. How could somebody lend a country money without any sort of guarantees? And this is something I think we need to look at. So at the end of the day, Madam President, the players who run these new companies, I think we need, as Senator Deonarine said, we need to ensure that things are running efficiently. When the goods and services come in, we have to make sure that when it comes in there, that the storage, the package, the cost is kept down, so it would not trickle down to the consumers. And I think that level of accountability is what we lacked before in successive boards at One Petrotrain, and we have to ensure that is not allowed. You know, the same sort of mentality is not allowed to run in the 4 new companies that we have. So at the end of the day, if the players who run these new entities are not monitored, we run that same risk. So this Pereira Fuel Trading Company is a startup company. It starts afresh. So there's no history of profit and loss. And this, I think, you know, we started, and it reminds me of a few years ago, Madam President, of BWIA. And we might come into the same scenario with Carl. Now, I would like to just go into one aspect, Madam President, is looking at the bill itself, the clauses of the bill. Clause 1, I think, is just the title of the bill. It doesn't need much to be said. Clause 2 actually inserts a definition of trade in business as it is not currently defined in the Act. And I think this is something that, you know, when we are restructuring Petrotrain took place, it was not realized or probably not noted, or as some others alluded to, it was probably such a quick work that it was not really, you know, it was such a quick work in progress that it was missed out. But regardless of what it is, the fact that we are here now dealing with this entity, we have no choice now to try and bring it into sync with being a trading company rather than a company that refines. So in the event that a refinery becomes operational in the future, I noted that this clause actually left open the option that it could be a trade-in business as well as a refinery business in the event that in the future we are able to start back some level of refining in our country. Looking at further down in the bill, Senator Deonarine actually looked how the ex-terminal price was calculated and went into details with that. And even the 5th schedule of the bill actually deals with the basis of computing this new ex-terminal price. And this is effected by Clause 2B of the bill, which now allows for the insertion of the 5th schedule. So I'm happy that the bill now gives the country the flexibility, both to import fuel or to produce fuel at the refinery. And with respect to the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, adjustments have been made to make this act consistent with the amendments made to the Petroleum Act. And this is really to allow the inclusions of the operations of the Pereira Fuel Trading Company Limited as a definition of a trading business. Clause 3A and 3B deals with the amendments to the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act to make them consistent with the amendments to the Petroleum Act. And under Section 8.1 in the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, there are 4 different variables in the calculation of the subsidy, one of which is the ex-refinery price. And given that the refinery is not in operation at this time, that the prices will be up to change. I looked at the new subsection 1A, which was inserted after subsection 1 in section 8 to include the new ex-terminal price variable in the calculation of the subsidy. Madam President, I understand that the bill also amends Section 12 of the Petroleum Production, Levy and Subsidy Act, which allows for the filing of a return to the minister, which I am looking at the effect that this brings into sync the fact that this brings in a greater level of accountability and of accountability and looking at the run-ins of the new companies. So all in all, Madam President, I think that this bill is needed to help the changes that came about. I think probably be it a lapse in the initial bill that we discussed before, or is it, is it a work in progress? And new things will come about that we may need to have changes as we go along. But all in all, Madam President, I look at this bill and I think that it has my support. It's just that I'm thinking we need to look at these companies more to ensure that a similar culture of how things were before in Petroleum does not now present itself in these new companies. Thank you.
Attorney General.
Speaker, Madam President, I confess that I came to speak on another piece of law, but I'm compelled in light of the last submission by Senator Deyalsingh to join in this debate, to just put a few simple facts upon the notes of Hansard. I've heard it referenced a few times, and in particular by Senator Deyalsingh when he said that he felt compelled to agree to a certain point made by Senator Mark. This law is not rushed. This law was not ill thought out. This law is not a knee-jerk reaction. Law has to be constructed, Madam President, on the back of process and data. Law has to be extrapolated in the context of the amendments that we make today, very importantly, on the back of the several pieces of law that are affected. For the record, let me place it on record now. The Petroleum Act, Chapter 6201, the Petroleum Production, Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, and certainly some of the subsidiary legislation, the orders, the schedules. One doesn't decide to produce work of this type by reference to detailed formulae and structures by way of knee-jerk reaction. So let's put this to bed very simply. Contrary to the serious inconsistencies in argument by Senator Haynes, because on the one hand, Senator Haynes came to this Senate to say the government seemed to have no plan at all. The government has not spoken to a plan. And then Senator Haynes went into great detail about the energy spotlight, about the publications, about the fora, and perhaps Senator Haynes wasn't paying attention to the fact that the Prime Minister of this country spoke to the Petroleum issue on 3 occasions. There were public addresses to nation. Would you like me to give way? Sure.
Thanks for giving me. Having a press conference is one thing, but giving details is a completely different thing. And so there, it said it gave us no plans. It really didn't. So unless you're going to tell me what the plan was that was articulated, I know there were press conferences, but what were the details in the press conferences?
Sure. I regret that I cannot assist you with the absorption of details.
No.
That would be a matter of reflection, and I mean that most sincerely.
Yeah.
I do accept that the opposition's role is to pour scorn on any government, at least from your perspective. But, Madam President, it is pellucidly clear for all those who wish to pay attention, in particular in the culmination of the energy spotlight, that the Honorable Prime Minister did not come to the nation with just a blank sheet. Certainly didn't come with a wheel spinning as to what the plan looked like, as we saw in other quarters. In discovering the methodology for this particular bill, no less team players came to the table than Potens and Partners and White and Case. And for those who are not capable of following who these people are, as the entire UNC bench seems incapable of following, these are the foremost experts in the energy industry in the world. One particularly on the exploration and production aspects and what the yield and methodology should look like, and the other being the foremost expert in the negotiation of the law and negotiations surrounding the arrangements. And this law, which we have proposed, this bill which proposes the amendment to the laws that we seek now, came on the back of published data with actual reference to methodology and rhyme and reason as to why the taxpayers of this country needed to relieve themselves of the situation of Petrotrin's perennial losses and go forward extrapolated losses, and why it is they needed to be restructured. So, Senator Haynes, I unfortunately can offer you no comfort. That would require a little research and a little absorption. But, Madam President, if I get to the bill itself, I want to put on record that Senator Deyalsingh raised a few important points which caused me to enter into this debate. Senator Deyalsingh asked for us to remember that we had to manage the subsidy and protection of taxpayers quite carefully. And Senator Deyalsingh also raised the issue of whether the market could be flooded by someone entering the market and basically driving the profitability of the entities, Paria, Heritage, etc., in that combined matrix downward. And I'd just like to put that to bed very quickly and very simply. No person can enter this market without a license. No license is offered without the Minister of Energy. No Minister of Energy offers a license without the Cabinet. And where the taxpayers of this country effectively own the primary assets, it would be illogical, if not insane, to allow a flooding of your market in the circumstances contemplated. It is just impossible that that scenario can present.
Attorney General, I'm looking at the regional market. Could somebody look at the regional market? And we are now competing outside, selling some of the products outside. A big company comes and says, let's stifle them here. Let's go outside now and give our products cheaper outside. The regional market will have no control.
Sure.
And this is what I'm...
And again, I'll put that to bed immediately. Yes. We have two markets. We have an external market beyond CARICOM, and then we have the CARICOM market. The principles of the CARICOM market are very simple. If a CARICOM territory, which is part of the CSME, has the product to offer, you trump it. If Trinidad and Tobago's product is on deck in the CSME, we have the preferential tariff treatment for this market. But what we're talking about today is the inflow and price fixing, not an outflow. So as an importer and trader in petroleum products, this bill is dealt squarely with the purpose of making sure the price formula at the pump is managed in a predictable, published fashion. So there can be no flooding of this market. No territory can enter the CARICOM where we are present, or certainly our market, without licensing and without purpose. So the concept, and I have to be extremely careful to correct most respectfully through you, Madam President, the submission made by my learned colleague, Senator Deyalsingh, because if the media were to pick up on what the question was, there can be panic. This bill is the antithesis of that. This bill is squarely rooted in having a publication of the fifth schedule, and very importantly, in ensuring that we have the subsidy formula published. So the question asked by my learned colleague, Senator Deyalsingh, as to the subsidy aspect, we are in this bill squarely treating with Clause 3, the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, and in treating with the formulation of that by preserving a bifurcation. When you come back to refining, you can go to exterminaling based on that basis, or if you are importing, we'll deal with the formula on that basis. We are treating with the subsidy formulas within the parent law, Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act, Chapter 6202, by way of a published position. Now let's deal with Senator Mark's usual hysteria. It is hysteria intellectually to offer an argument that people ought to panic. Why? Let's deal with the facts. What is the price at the pump? Today, yesterday, 1 month ago, August last year. The price at the pump has been fixed. And it has been fixed and will continue to be fixed because the law is in effect. On the one hand, by these amendments as we come into effect, but on the other hand, the maintenance of price at the pump was managed by the Ministry of Finance in conjunction with the Ministry of Energy. And that was a public statement made by the Minister of Finance and made by the Minister of Energy. So let's get the hysteria of Senator Mark out of the way, label it for what it is, same old, same old. This bill is really very simple. This bill is designed in the clauses that are set out here to put certainty and lawful purpose behind the formulation of ex-terminal pricing and also how we treat with subsidies and levies. It is intended to preserve the return to the marketing by refining in Trinidad and Tobago and also by the importation or trading of fuel. This is directly in concert with the Minister of Finance's statement as to maintaining the price at the pump exactly the way it is. And I will remind, as I come to a close very quickly, Madam President, when Bastio Pandey enjoyed the privilege of reforming Carney, which has similar purpose. We had Petrotrin on the one hand driving this bill and Carney. Let me remind this population, and students of history will know this. Carney and sugarcane fell in Trinidad and Tobago because of something called the Cotonou Agreement. It was the subsidy arrangement by the European Union, the EPA arrangements under the Cotonou Agreement. When those subsidies were removed by a UNC government, the market for sugar and its profitability collapsed entirely. The fact is, as we draw the comparison to this particular petroleum aspects, then Prime Minister Pandey made the correct decision. The profitability was driven by the fact that the European Union said they would no longer be enjoying the subsidies. And if the subsidy fell out and the market was no longer apparent, the country had to take a decision. You will never hear a PNM government come here and bash the UNC, bash the DLP, bash Mr. Pandey then as Prime Minister for doing the correct thing. So for heaven's sake, Mr. Vice President, why does the UNC intend to come here and cause mischief? Because the fact is that profitability is the profitability for the taxpayers of this country. And the taxpayers of this country need to ensure that their government has the strength to take the hard decisions. This is not an easy decision to have been made. We are warned, Mr. Vice President, by the fact that the bids for the purchase of the refinery are in and being assessed. We are warned that the compensation packages for those who have been affected by the closure of the refinery have been processed. $2.7 billion in cash have been paid out. Lands and other subsidies have been announced. Management of the fallout of the industry and absorption in the creation of alternate industries is actively afoot. Mr. Vice President, I don't know where Senator Mark's agitations come from. Perhaps he is just provoked by common sense meeting his line of logic or lack thereof. But what I can say, Mr. Vice President, is we know that history will judge this equation in the correct context. We ask the people, Senator Mark, Mr. Vice President, could I ask you to control my learned friend?
That's fine, Senator Mark. Please allow the Attorney General to make his contribution. There's no need to shout across the floor when he's making his contribution. Continue, Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the fact is that the certainty of ex-terminal pricing, the certainty of subsidy, the certainty of the levies that are engaged to underwrite this industry are before the Senate right now. It is this law that will give us the protection for the taxpayers. It is this law that will give us the protection for persons at the pump. It is this law that will allow for the return to the refinery as those bids come to settling and to certainty. It is this law that would allow the Senate to make common sense become a reality. This is far from rushed. The travaux préparatoires, the working materials to take us to this law required a significant amount of data production and data analysis to get it right. In the meanwhile, the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Finance have managed the situation at the pump. So, Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to make a few important corrections to the line of debate in this Honorable Senate, and I thank you.
Honorable members, at this point in time, I crave your indulgence to turn to item 8 on the order paper that deals with urgent questions. Senator Mark.
I hope this is the last time we'll have to go through this.
Senator Mark, just the question.
Yeah, thank you. To the Minister of Everything. Oh, sorry, I withdraw. I withdraw. Minister of Everything.
Members. Senator Mark, just follow the procedure that we are accustomed to. Ask your urgent question.
To the Minister of National Security. In light of concerns by the United States State Department that Trinidad and Tobago has not met the minimum standards for the elimination of human trafficking, can the Minister advise what measures are being taken to improve this country's Tier 2 level rating?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I start off by stating that it is wholly incorrect and inaccurate for anyone who has read the United States Department's TIPS report, Trafficking in Persons report, to state that the United States State Department has said that Trinidad and Tobago has not met the minimum standards. In fact, they've said the contrary. United States State Department TIPS report has congratulated Trinidad and Tobago on making significant progress in some areas. They have said that we still have progress to make in other areas, and they continue to encourage us. In fact, they have come out publicly, the embassy here in Port of Spain, to say that they look forward to the continued good working relationship between themselves and this administration, unlike what happened to put us in a lower than a Tier 2 level when we came in and met as an administration in 2015.
Mr. Vice President, if that is so, then can the Minister explain why the United States Department of State has alleged that there are government officials complicit in human trafficking in this country?
I would ask you to just rephrase the question that you're asking.
I was saying that if that is so, can the Honourable Minister indicate why in that said report the State Department has accused Trinidad and Tobago of the involvement of government officials in the trafficking of human beings?
Senator Mark, first and foremost, I won't allow that question. Next supplemental question, if you have it.
Yeah. Can I ask the Honourable Minister what steps have been taken to improve the screening process as it relates to victims of human trafficking who seem to be mistaken for refugees in accordance with the report of the United States Department of State? Can the Minister indicate, some clarification?
Mr. Vice President, it appears as though Senator Mark on the other side got a completely different report to the rest of the world. First of all, the U.S. State Department's official report, published by the U.S. State Department, says nothing about government officials being involved in anything. They've made certain allegations about persons in immigration and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and that is subject to investigation. Second,
you need to withdraw the question. So I cannot understand how we can respond.
How I want.
Okay, cannot respond to something.
First and foremost, 48.1 is not relevant. It's the wrong standing order that you're raising. Secondary to that, Minister of National Security is answering the question that is posed as your second supplementary question. I will allow him to do so. Continue, Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So, Mr. Vice President, as I was saying, it is wholly incorrect to say that there were any government officials involved. And with respect to the answering of the question as the screening of victims, I find that to be a most unfortunate choice of words, because any victim of human trafficking is not going to be subject by this administration to a screening process until after we've made sure that they've been properly looked after, they've received the necessary assistance, including psychological assistance, being put in a safe environment. Also, the continued use of the buzzword by those on the other side of refugees. We don't have refugees here. We're dealing with migrants. And anyone who is subjected to illegal human trafficking, this government will treat with them with the highest level of sincerity, and also treat with them in the way and manner that we are obliged to treat with them under our laws, and with a certain level of humanitarian assistance and dignity as we are accustomed treating with them.
Senator Mark, next urgent question.
We understand what the government is up to with these economic migrants. But anyway, we will deal with them. Yeah, of course. You too, Attorney General.
Next urgent question, Senator Mark.
Mr. Vice President, may I go on? To the Minister of National Security. In respect of Trinidad and Tobago's Tier 2 level rating in 2019, trafficking in human persons report, can the minister state how soon will a director of counter-trafficking unit be appointed?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, once again, there is absolutely nothing in the U.S. State Department's report and with respect to any Tier 2 level rating that is in any way related whatsoever to a director of counter-trafficking unit. The counter-trafficking unit has only been without a director from the end of May, and they are in the process. This is the public servants are in the process. They've completed the questioning and the whole process, and they expect to appoint a director of counter-trafficking, I'm told, within the next few days, or within the shortest possible time frame. When I asked them, they said within the next few days. They've completed the evaluation and the recommendation side.
Senator Mark.
Can I ask the Honourable Minister, with the absence or in the absence of a director since the month of May, how has this impacted on the work or the workings of the counter-trafficking unit? Mr. Vice
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the counter-trafficking unit has continued to function. As happens in these circumstances, the next most senior people have stepped up to the plate. They've been acting along with the assistance of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. It's no different to how the UNC bench acts in the absence of a real leader.
Senator Mark.
Anyway, don't get involved in UNC business.
Senator Mark, ask
don't get involved in UNC business.
Senator Mark, please.
Yeah.
The time, Senator. Let me remind members, those asking and those answering, that the time for urgent questions is not very long. It's only 10 minutes in its totality. So every time there's a tit for tat and an argument across the floor, it eats away at the time and undermines the process. Continue, Senator Mark.
Apologize to you, sir. Only you. To the Minister of National Security. In light of recent reports of illegal land occupation by Venezuelan and Colombian migrants, as you are calling them, in Brickfield, Caripichaima, can the minister verify whether these reports are being investigated?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Welcome back. The answer is yes.
And can the minister indicate how long these investigations are going to take in light, Madam President, of the severity of the reports that we have received thus far? What time frame?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, these reports are being investigated. It is impossible to say how long the investigation is going to take place. Resources are being placed on it, working along with the Commissioner of State Lands and the Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. The necessary authorities are looking at it.
Honourable members, the time for urgent questions has expired. Senator Mark, we now go on to your question on notice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Time flew so quickly. Let's see. Question number 183.
No,
to
84.
184?
Yes.
I beg your pardon? No, 183 too. Remember he was there for 83 and 84. Oh, I think we had some.
Yeah. The acting leader of government in business had asked for 183 to be deferred for 2 weeks, and 184 was the one that was stood down. Is it that 183 is available for answer today? All right, so, yes, Senator Mark then.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Red and dead. Red and dead. Anyway, Madam President, may I address you? Question 183 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, to date, no proposal has been submitted by the Commissioner of Police to the Ministry of National Security for the recruitment of police officers on contract. Further, any recruitment of police officers has to be consistent with the applicable law, which in this case is the Police Service Act, police service regulations. And not being aware of the specifics of this matter, the government is not going to comment any further until it's received a proposal from the Commissioner of Police.
Senator Mark.
Can the Minister indicate whether the government will support a proposal from the Police Commissioner to recruit?
Well, Senator Mark, I won't allow that question because the Minister gave an answer to your question as posed. So you can ask another one.
Madam President, may I ask the Honourable Minister whether at this point in time in the police service, are there officers on contract? Can I ask that question to you?
And that question is not relevant either to the one as posed.
Can I go to 184?
Sure.
Question 184 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, according to information provided by the Commissioner of Police, claims that government contracts have been given to alleged gang leaders are being investigated. The investigations are currently ongoing, and as such, information on findings cannot be disclosed at this time. It should be noted that unlike previous governments, it is not the policy of the present government to award contracts to criminals.
Senator Mark.
Okay. Madam President, can the... No. Madam President, may I ask through you? Can I ask through you and get some peace in this chamber, please? Madam President, can the Honourable Minister indicate whether he's aware, before the Commissioner of Police made these claims, whether the government was aware that gang leaders under the government of the People's National Movement were in fact issued with contracts. Can the Honourable Minister indicate whether he's aware prior to the Police Commissioner's intervention and claim of gang leaders being issued with contracts under the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the PNM government.
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, as the Minister of National Security, I am not aware. I am, however, aware of government contracts being given to gang leaders, for example, under the former Minister of Housing, Dr. Munilal, to a gang leader called Spanish from the Beta, to build a police station. Well, it is. They built a police station.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Yes. Do you have any more? That's why I'm on my legs.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask the minister, having regard to his outburst or his statement, whether these matters that he has referred to have been reported to the Commissioner of Police in this instance?
Minister of National Security.
Madam, correct. Madam President, it's quite ironic. This is something that has been out in the public domain, I believe, since 2014, since 2015. And in fact, the then Minister of National Security, who's now the current Commissioner of Police, is the one who was alerted to it.
Before he was fired by the UNC.
Senator Mark.
Specific question.
No, Senator Mark.
Yes.
Senator Mark, Senator Amin, please. Please. Senator Mark, you have another supplementary question to pose. You may pose it.
So can the minister indicate to this House whether it is the policy of the PNM government not to employ gang leaders via contracts within the state sector? Can he categorically state for this Senate today that it's the policy of the PNM not to engage gang leaders via contracts in the state sector? Can I get that information from the Honourable Minister?
That question is not allowed. You have one more supplementary if you wish.
No, I think
okay. Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, is that question 283 was deferred, but we're in a position to also answer 283 with your leave.
Senator Richards.
Madam President, good afternoon, colleagues. Through you, Madam President, question number 283 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and to Senator Richards. According to the information received from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the fraud squad has reported that no Venezuelan criminals were involved in financial crimes at ATMs of local financial institutions for the periods May 1st to 31st, 2019, and June 1st to 13th, 2019. Further checks at the Crime and Problem Analysis Unit, CAPA, of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service also revealed that for the same period, there are no reports of Venezuelan criminals involved in financial crimes at ATMs of said institutions.
Senator Richards.
Thank you for the answer, Minister. Can the Minister indicate if the said state agencies have been able to identify allegations of crimes in the last 6 months out of the period?
Well, Senator Richards, that question does not arise.
Thank
yeah?
you.
May I,
Senator Mark?
No, I'm not asking a question. I just want to get clarification.
No one else has any more questions to the Minister? Yes, all right. Senator Mark?
Yeah, Madam President, I'd like your guidance on question 269 in the appendix, which was due on the 14th of June. Can I get some clarification?
Order itself has that question was deferred for 2 weeks on the 17th of June, so it's not yet due for answer. Yeah? So, honourable senators, we will now resume the debate. Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. As I rise to contribute to this debate, I want to start off with a quote from an article titled "Getting Behind the Headlines," which appeared in the Business Guardian of June the 6th, 2019. And the sentence is, I quote, "Not seeking advice presents a convenient opportunity for plausible deniability of knowledge of the alternatives." A great economist in the Caribbean and son of the soil, Lloyd Best, is also quoted as being kinder in his choice of words by claiming not ignorance, but innocence, which leads to incompetence. So it is this plausible deniability, Madam President, that has led to, firstly, this PNM regime unceremoniously disbanding its only economic development and advisory board, choosing to advise itself, closing down Petroleum, now birthing Paria, Heritage, and by proper pronunciation, Guaracara. I grew up in Marabella, so I must know the proper pronunciation of Guaracara. Yes. I think the Minister of Trade is unaware of the proper pronunciation. Despite the protests to the contrary, Madam President, of the Attorney General. Now, Madam President, what was unfortunate, I think you were out of the chamber at the time. And
don't know why we are continuing with this, who is in the chamber, who is not in the chamber. Please, okay? Senator Obika, make your presentation. All right?
I apologize. I was only seeking to keep you abreast of what happened.
No, the President
The Attorney General, Madam President, in contributing to this debate, he did say that he was unprepared and that he jumped in without washing his feet, as we say in Trinidad and Tobago. But the Attorney General, Madam President, chose to bring up the closure of Caroni to justify Paria. And because, Madam President, I understand that there's no other economist who can contribute in this debate, as the one economist has already done so, being the member of the independent bench. The Honorable Minister of Finance is asking, who is that? So the issue is the World Trade Organization, to correct the record from the Attorney General's misunderstanding of history, the World Trade Organization, in responding from a panel response to a complaint by Brazil, Thailand, and Australia regarding the preferential treatment afforded to sugar-producing countries, of which Trinidad and Tobago is included, I will only go to the recommendation, the conclusion 8 at the end. And the panel concluded that the European communities, through its sugar regime, had acted inconsistently with its obligations under Articles 3.3 and 8 of the Agreement on Agriculture by providing export subsidies within the meaning of Article 9.1. So in essence, a party to this complaint, a third party, is listed as Trinidad and Tobago. For Trinidad and Tobago to be listed as a third party to this complaint, Madam President, and this was lodged in the year 2002, the panel report is of 15th October 2004, all right? In 2002, at the time of the complaint, it was for a year in question, 2000-2001, when the UNC was in government. However, it meant that the UNC stood as a third party to the complaint, meaning they saw that there was an interest of Trinidad and Tobago in keeping in place, firmly in place, the preferential treatment regarding most favored nation tariffs for sugar to access the European Union. So the Attorney General is wrong in laying blame with the UNC, firstly. Secondly, the closure of Caroni happened in the year circa 2003. And just last year, and I will close on this point because whilst it may seem irrelevant to the debate, the Attorney General brought it in. A headline titled, "Union 15 years later, ex-Caroni workers still waiting." Saturday, 14th April 2018, by Richardson Delay in the Newsday. And the last point I will make on this statement, Madam President, is the blame for unceremoniously closing Caroni and misappropriation of the lands thereafter falls squarely at the feet of the People's National Movement. So I will get to where I was supposed to, talking about this bill. Now, Madam President, we have before us some bill essentials. And we have 3 clauses. The bill had 4 before it reached this House, but it only has 3 clauses in this bill. So I want to go straight to clause 3, C, subsection Roman 1. And it states there, the subsidy shall be computed monthly in respect of sales of each petroleum product listed in the schedule by a person carrying on marketing business, etc. Monthly subsidy. Now, Madam President, I think the country is poorer for the way this bill was piloted today. The country is poorer for the way this bill was unceremoniously piloted today. The Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance made no attempt, 0 attempt, to do justice to the legislation that is before us. So therefore, we have it now. One must first identify the clauses in the bill and provide clarity where there was none even proffered at the beginning. The minister spent less than 6 minutes, Madam President. To me, I find that should not happen in something where we are speaking about the patrimony of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Madam President, it may surprise you to know. Actually, it would not, because you are familiar with point of view. So it may disappoint you greatly to know the way in which the ex-workers and the current energy sector workers are being treated in what this government is calling pariah trading. I apologize. What the PNM, because they soon will be in opposition. What the PNM is calling pariah trading heritage. There is no full complement of staff.
Along the lines, thank you, along the lines of my previous interventions, I need for you to have your contribution on the matter at hand and not, you have to deal with what is before us in this bill.
Madam President, I understand. We are talking about a trading operation. The bill also contemplates that Trinidad and Tobago should return to refining. All right? There are clauses in this bill that maintains ex-refinery price, from the definition parts to the parts that deal with the calculation of the subsidy. So the question, Madam President, that the entire country wants to know is who will run the refinery. We have one, Wilfred Espinay, saying the refinery will be sold. Paria will be sold, Madam President, apologies.
Is it true?
We have the Prime Minister, and I want to say something on OWTU. The Oil Field Workers Trade Union, Madam President, the din from the Attorney General is unbearable.
Honorable members, could we please abide by the standing orders and allow me to hear the contribution of Senator Obika. Senator Obika, please continue.
Graciously, Madam President. Now, Madam President, the Oil Field Workers Trade Union was saying they will have the opportunity so that this bill would have been about them. By now, they would have thought that this bill would have been about them. I'm lowering my decibel levels to facilitate the low ceiling levels.
I rise
well,
on
call the standing
standing
order and I will sit. Call the number of the standing order. Don't give me no speech. So, Madam President.
Please allow the standing order to be invoked. Attorney
Thank you,
General.
Madam President. I arise on standing orders 46-1 and 53-1B.
Okay.
Go. So, Senator Obika, I will caution you again about relevance. And I'll ask you, you can continue, but be relevant to the bill, please. Okay?
Madam President, after promising the OWTU the first take, the Minister of Finance is on record, and had he piloted this bill, the response would have been relevant. The Minister of Finance is on record as saying no fly-by-night company with no assets, no history,
Senator
no
Obika,
capacity will take over.
Senator Obika, so you just, I am listening very attentively. So you just heard your words. If the Minister of Finance had piloted the bill, he would have said. So you're responding to something that has not been said, in essence. I will ask you, please, to respond to what has been said in this debate and what is relevant to the bill that is at hand. Please, Senator Obika.
I'll go into the Petroleum Regulations, Chapter 1601. Madam President, you must understand, when you leave Point 14 and you come here after spending 3 hours in traffic and you get a lackluster pilot of a bill, it is very disappointing and disheartening. So I apologize, but this may be the train for this debate, because really and truly it grieves me. So Clause 2 speaks to an ex-terminal price, Madam President. All right? And before that, in terms of the Petroleum Regulations, Madam President, the administration is saying that they want that to remain open, to allow this country to return to a time where we continue to refine our own oil. But it is this government's doing. It is the PNM's doing. That is the reason why we have no refinery. So the external price. Now the issue that we have here is what are the components of this ex-terminal price? You know? Madam President, I think that is something that the entire country wants to know. What are the components of that? The issue of maintaining PARIA whilst the refinery is in operation creates a messy situation for policymakers. Madam President, this is because the formula will account for components, all of which are variables except retail price at the pump. So, for instance, the formula which features throughout this bill, ex-terminal price being a component of the ex-refinery price from the point of external origin, cost, insurance, and freight, duties paid where applicable, and so on. Now, we have to make sure there are mechanisms for benchmarking these fees. That's the first step in this whole process. And making sure that when these are paid, they are in line with market rates. Because, Madam President, the Minister of Finance in another place would have mentioned the rates are minute, small. But, Madam President, half of 1%, when you are dealing with millions, when you are dealing with billions in TT dollars, is a lot of money. So the gross margin of the distributors, being National Petroleum, Unipet, for instance, or whomever else this government is envisioning to bring into the market. You see that the Honourable Minister of Energy is with us again. And I'm sure the Honourable Minister will speak about the shallow wells that Shell is going after and so on. Because that's the history of the past. So, Madam President, so we know that Shell and the other multinational corporations have no interest in the retail business in Trinidad and Tobago. So the question brings us to the petroleum levy. It brings us to what concessions are being contemplated by the vagueness of this bill. What concessions? And when there are concessions, Madam President, the only people who stand to lose consistently, if the concessions aren't well thought out, are the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And since this government has fired its entire advisory board, one thing you can guarantee yourself, Madam President, is that they are short on good advice. They are very short on good advice. So those concessions may very well be to the detriment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, regarding the difference between the ex-terminal price and the gross margin, let's say the retail price, in terms of volume sales and wholesale and retail, It is messy because this is a transitionary measure. So if we put in place approaches that can address any situation, we can be protected in unplanned situations. The issue is, Madam President, we are going from a situation where we had significant, intense knowledge on the processes and the procedures and the cost structures from the refinery gate to the pump before. But now, because you are getting your supply, maybe from different suppliers, different points in time, where the price variations may be significant, you have challenges regarding control, regarding managing the level of expenditure and call in the public purse. Because the Minister of Energy would come to the Parliament and boast. Paria is making a profit. The Minister of Trade, profits are being made. Madam President, even if you make 100 million in profit, but you increase the subsidy by $500 million, who are we fooling? One can only fool oneself when that is the narrative that you are trying to push. The reality is, the question this government must answer. This bill, Madam President, speaks to the levity, the space that we are giving the government regarding the subsidy. That is what this bill is about. But if you are bringing a bill to speak to the space you want for the subsidy, then more information should be afforded to the population free of charge. So there's talk about licenses. This bill contemplates that as well. I will get to that in terms of what the government should have been bringing to the Parliament. And there is no space for this regime, Madam President, to blame the past administration regarding any licenses. Because this is a new arena for the country. This is a new arena for our country in terms of importing refined petroleum products for sale at the pump. So therefore, if it's a new arena, it should have been well ventilated. And then the opportunity for nationals to see which company is getting the deal to freight the petroleum. What is the cost? Who is the customs broker at the point of origin? Who is the customs broker in Trinidad and Tobago? Madam President, in Paria right now, persons are on month-to-month. PricewaterhouseCoopers is running roughshod in Paria trading. Kenson, a P&M financier, has a stranglehold on Heritage. There are no staff members, there are no full complement of staff in those companies. The people of Trinidad and Tobago can be shortchanged. So what exactly is the situation we are faced with? Unclear knowledge. It begs the question as to the subsidy regime and who suffers versus who benefits. Keep in mind, Madam President, that the unemployment levy, the history that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries may come and boast that the first Prime Minister, Eric Williams, created the unemployment levy because of the significant swings in price and the significant profits the upstream operators were making, that the people of Trinidad and Tobago must benefit, so the levy was put in place. We accept that as a point of history, but you can't live on past glories. You understand? That is a point of history. But what is the situation today? The unemployment levy. What is the situation with the unemployment levy? At that time, the mix was more in favor of oil than gas. You have meetings with Shell. You might be giving them concessions. You could have dropped on them the unemployment levy or some other levy regarding gas. Now, I'll move on, Madam President. I want to advance that this regime will do one of two things. One, this regime where the subsidy contemplates an X terminal price plus the gross margin for calculation of the subsidy, in the same scenario where we can have a refinery, so you have an X refinery price, which should be significantly lower, all things being equal. What is going to happen is going to penalize the local refinery producer, given the commonality of price at the pump and the subsidy so applied. Madam President, just for clarity for persons, I wish to just succinctly summarize what I just said. You have refined super gas coming from outside. It attracts shipping duties, other tariffs. It comes, say, it attracts a customs duty. It attracts a VAT. VAT is paid on all the costs that were already compiled. So the VAT on that should be significantly high compared to the VAT on the gas that you produce locally and you refine, the oil, sorry, that the super gas for the pump that you refine and produce locally. All right? So the guy who produces locally, he may not have an incentive to keep his price lower. So he will sell at that higher price, that is the ex-terminal price. In a situation where you only have Paria being allowed to import, given the boasts of the Attorney General about licenses aren't given freely and you regulate these things, if we envisage only Paria being able to import, and then only one person operating the refinery in Pointe-à-Pierre, then our oligopolistic system will prevail. Only two players. They will fix the price amongst themselves, and the customer will suffer at the end of the day. That will lay waste to the whole point of the levy that you impose on the producers upstream, because the system does not make sense. Now, Madam President, I see the Honourable Minister of Energy sees the benefit in my argument, and hopefully maybe he may so advise the policymakers to take a second look at what would be the regime when there is a local refinery in place while simultaneously you are importing through another player. Prior, we would have imported, Petroleum may have imported for the refinery, Madam President, when the refinery is on shutdown for maintenance. But it is the same player. So that moral hazard of price fixing does not apply. So I want to continue. No, continue, not conclude. So, Madam President, what will happen is we'll have a scenario where there's significant inefficiency in the market. Can I ask what time I should end, Madam President?
Break will be taken at the regular time, Senator Obika.
Okay, thank you. Madam President, you know I really enjoy debates on the economy, and so I have so much more in front of me. Now, Madam President, we are on clause 3 as the ministerial judge is asking for clarification. So
Madam President, I'm sure you're not hearing me alone. Please, members on the other side, disturbing.
Madam President, I have some questions to ask. Thank you, Madam President. So, what are the benchmarks used? The Honourable Minister of Energy and Energy Industry is coming after. I want to ask that question. What are the other options, given that you're contemplating a scenario where Paria will be involved and a separate operator for the refinery in Guaracara? And what is the justification for choosing the ones used? And of course, the people want some detail. Now, I won't go to what the Minister of Finance laid on the Hansard because I've already mentioned it in passing before. But I want to look at the rationale for keeping the ex-refinery price in calculation of formula. The implications on the trading industry. All right? Now, the Honourable Minister of the Ministry of Finance did, in piloting the bill, mention that the industry may be similar with some modifications once we pass this legislation and the refinery at Guaracara finally comes on stream. That begs the question, what is the tender process involved for engaging persons along the value chain? Given that the legacy Petroleum companies aren't staffed and they're operating through service providers, who controls the tender process? Is it sole source? Does the tenders board have sight of it? What exactly are the regulations that protect the taxpayer and the treasury? The computation of GDP. Clause 4 of this bill was taken out. We know that. I'm not going to speak to Clause 4. I'm going to speak to the intent and where it is important to this bill. Because this bill speaks to a subsidy, which impacts the Treasury. And the government was trying to look at calculation of GDP from production data. I want to advise the Honorable Minister of Energy Industries. They need not look at the Income Tax Act for diminishing the secrecy clause. What they could have simply done was look at specific requirements to PARIA and any operators engaged with heritage and so on to disclose all their production data to the state. And then the state could decide what they feel would be, they can disclose beyond that. Because you don't need to remove the secrecy provision for all taxpayers just for us to see the production data for PARIA and for heritage and Guacara. So I just want to advise the government that they didn't need to look at the secrecy provisions in the Income Tax Act. So Madam President, I'm hearing some protests from the Minister and the Ministry of Finance. Those could have been in the piloting of the bill. Now, Madam President, the government, the financial position of PARIA trading, we always hear about the profit made. Now, remember, profit is on an accrued basis, not cash basis. Profit doesn't speak to the financial position of the entity. And the impact of this legislation on the financial position of the entity will not be known because we have no means through which we can get that information. Now, you're saying that PARIA made profits of roughly 15 million per month, all right, after 2 months in operation. That was in the public domain, and that is very minuscule. The question you always have to ask this government is this profit, is it operating profit, or is it net profit attributable to taxpayers?
Senator Obika.
I continue.
Yes, please. Make your contribution relevant. You've given us a lot of information, but that information is not relevant to the bill at hand. Can you please?
Thank you, Madam President. Now, this bill in Clause 3, subsection D, Clause 3D, I and 2 Roman, speaks about marketing business and trading business and so on. And there's a question about licensing. And the Attorney General did not answer the question. He said, of course, you should have a license. But the question as to whether PARIA has what license they have and under which law specifically that caters for, that contemplates such a license. Where is that covered? So the answer is still in the balance. But I guess that happens when you don't wash your foot before you jump in a debate. Now, Madam President, so should PARIA need to get a license for trading, transportation, and storage? Does the ministry have a model license or license regime for trading? Does the ministry's current staffing and operating procedures, very important, Madam President, allow it to efficiently regulate trading businesses? Because all of this, what is the sense of all of this if we don't have the teeth at the Ministry of Energy? If you don't have the full and relevant staff complement at the Ministry of Energy, maybe the government should have proposed some alterations where that is concerned. Now, Madam President, regarding the Petroleum Act, Article 29, it considers the necessary expedient for carrying out the purposes of such an act, ensuring that the register of all licenses issued and any orders, judgments, or awards relating thereto is maintained in appropriate department or departments. Now, because this is a special arrangement, because it was not contemplated prior, meaning trading business from an ex-refinery position, terminal standpoint, in terms of the business model of PARIA, is this properly captured under the legislation, under the Petroleum Act and the subsidiary legislation, regulations? Is it properly captured? If not, I want to ask the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries to engage his legal department to see if they can add some teeth there. There's some questions I have as well, several questions I have, and this is how my contribution will flow until it ends, regarding licenses. Should there be a new class of license? Notwithstanding all the talk about license, should there be a new class of license for trading specifically? Can the minister explain the state of the licensing regime? I hope the break, as will be afforded the minister, will allow him to give an account as to the licensing regime in the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, and if there is any requirement to strengthen it at this point in time. Has the minister established an order? The Honorable Attorney General spoke to orders, for instance. But in this particular case, has the minister established such an order? The bill contemplates particular orders regarding the type of fuel and so on, regarding compliance of companies that should be allowed to participate in such a business. And there are some final questions I have, and after that I will.
Senator Obika, thank you. We will now suspend honorable senators, and we will resume at 5 p.m. Senator Obika, you have used up 32 minutes of your speaking time.